Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another crazy college football game. I mean, seriously, in just the first week of college football, we watched two top 10 teams fall, a little bit of foreshadowing, a little bit of whatever. I would just like to say before we get straight into this, like and subscribe. It helps a lot. Comment also helps as well. Let's get straight into it. So, my prediction for this game was, hey, you know what? It's at Duke. I know it'll be a tough game for Clemson, but I believe this is a more solid Clemson team. They will double their score and make this a little bit of a proving point that they won't. No, I was so wrong. So wrong. Duke absolutely just shut this team down. I mean, completely and utterly embarrassing for Clemson. I have a feeling Clemson is going to be a pretty bad team with this loss. I do still think they have a solid defense, and their offense showed some capabilities of moving the ball down the field. The problem is they just couldn't stop messing up. They just looked so inconsistent. I mean, literally, when I forgot the game was even on, so I didn't get to see a large portion of it. I walked up to my buddy and I was like, oh yeah, the Clemson Duke game is on. Let's see what that score's at. I saw that it was 7-6 and Duke was driving. I was like, okay, you know what? This could be some potential. And when I turned on the game, it all of a sudden it said 7-12. So Duke had scored, apparently on some insane scramble or something like that. And I was like, okay, this could get really interesting. And from that point on, I watched as Clemson tried to drive down the field, turn the ball over, missed a field goal, and turned the ball over. I mean, truly, utterly ridiculous. I had to turn the game off, though, because work was calling. So I didn't really get to see all of this game. I don't really get to analyze this like I did with certain other games and whatnot. There's no major takeaways from this, except for the fact that when I was watching this game, Clemson could not stop making mistakes. To be quite frankly honest, I mean, Duke was all right, but Clemson could have beat this Duke team very handily. Clemson was able to just run the ball down their throats like it was nothing, as well as they could pass the ball pretty well too. Overall, both teams had a lot of rushing yards and whatnot. Let's go ahead and look at the game cast now. So the Clemson quarterback, I think it's like Cade Klubnik or something like that. He was 27 for 43, 209 yards, one interception, and one touchdown. Those are pretty awful Those are pretty awful stats. However, it was Will Shipley, 17 carries and 114 yards. He did great. The Duke quarterback, he was 17 for 33 through the air and 175 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. But that's bad stats that's very bad stats. Well, he had 8 carries for 98 yards and a touchdown on the ground. I believe one of those came from a massive run, though. Yeah, he ran it for 44 yards. I mean, that only makes up around half of it. So he still looked to be more of like a dual threat kind of thing. But ultimately, it was simply, in my eyes, this game was tilted in Duke's favor because of the turnovers and the mistakes. I mean, seriously. Listen to this. Clemson has 29 first downs. Duke has 17. Clemson was 7 for 15 on third down efficiency. Duke was 5 for 15. However, Duke was 1 for 1 on fourth down efficiency. Clemson was 0 for 2. They just could not stop making mistakes. Duke had 7 penalties, though, and Clemson only had 1. That was the only thing going for Clemson. So, yeah. Ultimately, Clemson probably just sold their season. They probably just destroyed their national championship hopes. They probably just destroyed it. However, this now makes, in my eyes, the Florida State-Clemson game more interesting, where people were favoring Clemson to win that game and still might be. Now the turntables. Why haven't they? Now Florida State will most likely be favored in this game by the large majority. Could that potentially mean there's some dark horse potential where Clemson put things together and upsets a very highly ranked Florida State team? Ultimately, this was just not a game Clemson could lose. If we look at it in the long run, Clemson gets two Pee Wee schools, of course. FAU, I don't know. I don't want to say anything, but FAU could do some damage. They're a part of the AAC this year. People have hyped them up a little bit, but whatever. Let's just continue past that. Fourth game of the year, they host Florida State. That's already a very tough game. But let's say Clemson manages to win that. They have to go play at Syracuse, and then they host Wake Forest, and then they're at Miami, and then they're at NC State. I'd say the hardest one out of those games would be at NC State. But then the Final Four stretch is just very, very difficult. They host Notre Dame, they host Georgia Tech, they host North Carolina, and then they're at South Carolina. So in those three of those last four games are really tough. The Georgia Tech one shouldn't be that difficult, but they have to beat a very high-powered and strong Notre Dame team. They have to beat a very a potential Heisman candidate quarterback and a very strong rush defense, North Carolina. And then they have to go play Spencer Rattler, who is just a very explosive offensive performer through the air. Ultimately, of those games, I could most likely see Clemson losing to Florida State, Notre Dame, and North Carolina. I could already see them losing those three. If anything, I would say they would most likely lose to Florida State. And then in a very close second place, Notre Dame. Nowhere in a million years would you catch me saying Duke. Now, I love the upset, and I love to fight for the 4-loss, 5-loss teams and whatnot. In a good day where I'm, let's say, placing a sports bet, you can count on me to bet on Duke. I would bet on Duke in that game. You can count on it because I always look at the home field and whatnot. But I just was like, you got to fight for these teams sometimes. It's hard to make assumptions. Well, I was wrong. This could very well be a 5-loss Clemson team. I mean, they might not beat Florida State. They might not beat Notre Dame. They might not beat North Carolina, and they might not beat South Carolina. They could lose those 4 games, and then with the loss against Duke, they could go 5-loss. Very, very possible. Again, it's week 1. I have to clarify this in almost every single video right now. It's week 1. We don't want to jump to conclusions, but today, this one stands out like an eyesore for Clemson. So, with that being said, well, let's go ahead and look at Duke now, actually, before I just get out of this video. Let's go ahead and look at Duke. Let's see what they're looking at. I know they host Notre Dame, so Duke has to go play a school called Lafayette, and then they host Northwestern. Northwestern just got beat up by Rutgers, so that should be a very easy win. Duke has to go play at UConn. NC State won there in a tight, close game, but ultimately not really. They kind of ruled it. And then they have to play Notre Dame. Then they host Notre Dame. They host NC State. Then they're at FSU. No way. They're at Louisville. That could be a tough one. They're hosting Wake Forest. They're at North Carolina. No way. They're at Virginia, and then they finish off the season against Pitt. So from what I can dissect from those, I'd say 2 definite losses at North Carolina and at FSU. I don't think you can go in there. I think they're just they're more developed. They're like a Clemson team, a stronger Clemson team that just doesn't make mistakes like they did tonight. That's what I'm taking from this. I could maybe see them upsetting Notre Dame. Because most likely right now, what we're going to see is a 4-0 Duke team that could be ranked pretty highly since they take down the number 9 team in the nation. They could be ranked pretty highly, which makes the Notre Dame-Duke game, that's going to be a packed Duke Stadium, which gets loud and gets scary for Notre Dame. So there could be some fan incentive, but when you're on the road at FSU, at North Carolina, there's no Duke incentive. It's all the other team. So the momentum leaves. It was already a pretty full crowd, I feel like, for Duke against Clemson, and clearly it swayed into Duke's favor. So, yeah, I mean, Duke, man, I line up 4 losses for them, maybe even 3. Duke at Louisville looks like a tough one. but you can maybe even swap that around with Pitt at Duke. But nah, this could be a good Duke team, man. I mean, this was definitely a game that that has altered the seasons for the two. That's two top 10 teams already falling in just the first week of football. And ultimately, I think that's three top 25 teams falling. Yeah, I guess that's five top 27 teams because Texas Tech and South Carolina both lost. So, yeah, that's that for that video. Hope you guys enjoyed. A like and subscribe would help. Comment also helps. And, yep, that's all for me. Adios.